There are cancers I'd rather have than try to define communism on the internet. It wouldn't matter how perfect my definition was or how many citations I can muster. There are certain things that people are simply incapable of having a good faith conversation about, and communism is one of them. I'd ask you to consider why that is, why virtually nothing is taught about one of the most important philosophies in all of human history in schools, why schools don't even teach what capitalism is. I'd ask this, but the answers I would get would be really stupid and probably misspelled. This is going to make answering whether the Tau are communists really hard. In the lore of 40k, they're quite a minor faction. Most humans in the Imperium will go their lives without ever needing to know or care about the Tau Empire, which only exists in the galaxy's eastern fringe. Games Workshop doesn't like giving exact numbers for things, but I've seen estimates anywhere between 200 and 1,000 worlds, including artificial habitats, Dyson rings, so on. That makes it bigger than, say, the realm of Ultramar that's on its borders, but 1/10,000th for the size of the Imperium. If they or any of the major factions ever wanted to wipe them out, then they could. They won't, because money, but they could, and it's only the Imperium's complete lack of having their shit together that means they don't send a crusade fleet to finish them. This all said, they've achieved more with less in less time than any other species in the setting. While Horus was Heresian, the Blue Tau, which we confusingly also called the Tau, were in the Stone Age. In the 35th millennia, a Mechanicus explorator fleet discovered the Tau homeworld, which is also called Tau. It passed by and determined that it had only just developed fire. They were a footnote on a report that probably nobody read, alongside thousands of other primitive species that would be exterminated if they happened to be sitting on something the Imperium wanted. They would have remained a footnote and a species of warring Neolithic tribes if the Ethereals hadn't appeared. So there was a major siege at the largest city on their planet. By this time they had gunpowder, cannons, and so on. A warlike tribe from the plains were attacking the relatively settled city folks. The siege had dragged on for 5 long years when a mysterious interloper appeared. This new guy exuded a quiet authority, when both sides found that irresistible. Probably quite literally irresistible. The siege was over, and the ideas that new arrival spoke of, a greater good that every Tau should work towards, was spread across the planet. Now, it's never directly stated, but this origin story is far too neat. There must be something more to it, and given how comfortable the Tau are with large-scale propaganda and memory wipes, the real origins of the Empire could be anything. So the Ethereals organised Tau society into 4 castes: fire for military, earth for manufacture and agriculture, air castes for communications and later space travel, and water for merchants and diplomats. Within a few centuries they were expanded to other worlds. The Tau are the only playable faction of 40k with no precedent in Warhammer Fantasy Battle, or before that D&D and Tolkien. They're an entirely new creation, created in part so that GW could cut into the lucrative gunpla market, and partly so there was somebody at least somewhat good in the setting. This didn't go down well with fans, and for once in the history of the human race, the fans were actually right. Games Workshop started introducing some ambiguities into the Tau in later editions, to the point that today there's no doubt that the Ethereals are deeply sus. So the Tau spread out in spheres from their homeworld, unlike the Imperium who just washed up wherever the warp took them. Their faster than light technology is kind of warp based. Regular Tau don't have any sort of psychic presence, so instead of going fully into the warp and risking getting all event horizon, they just make short micro jumps. It's slower but safer. Since they've expanded, they've brought some psychic spacefaring civilizations into the fold to do their navigation. And that's their MO. Although a lot of the Tau you'll find on a tabletop are the standard blue kind, they also use, and emphasis on use, hundreds of other species, literally hundreds. Take the Vespid for instance, angry bugs that work great as skirmishing troops, who have like a limited hive mind. They're in a new kilting box, and one of them is wearing a communion helm, which lets them directly control their subordinates and be controlled by Tau command. They're functionally a species without free will at this point, totally enslaved to the greater good. The first ever species they met, the Poktroon, went extinct shortly after first contact, and the Tau decided, you know what, they'd probably want us to have their planet, The Tau first made contact with humans after their second round of expansion. As much as it is ruthlessly totalitarian, the Imperium is hopelessly incompetent, and humans in outlying settlements have no compunction with trading with aliens or using orc mercenaries. The trader started relationships with this up-and-coming new species, and the watercast started putting out feelers in neighbouring systems. I don't know if they're particularly persuasive, if they use some kind of psychic or hypnotic indoctrination system, or if the Imperium, even its outlying Wild West settlements, is just so horrible to live in that its citizens will throw in their lot with aliens. But plenty of Imperial worlds have gone Tau. During the Damocles Gulf Crusade, the first major war between the Imperium and Tau, the Imperium left behind whole worlds when they withdrew to attack High Fleet Behemoth. And those worlds and the armies on them were offered amnesty, which many accepted. There's also a group of kin who joined them, who call themselves the Demiurge. They were actually part of the Tau lore even when the Leagues of Votan had been written out, kind of that interregnum between them being the Squats and the Leagues. And that kind of kept the flame alive of being drunk and good at singing. There are billions of humans living in the Tau Empire now, and they're referred to as Gravesa, or human helpers. That's helpers, not fellow Tau citizens. There's a reason for this. The blue Tau seem to have some sort of psychic connection with the ethereal caste. Not outright mind control, but a tendency to automatically defer to them on literally everything. There's no discord within Tau society as long as there are ethereals around. And as soon as they're out of the picture, the Tau suddenly get a lot more rebellious. The humans are second-class citizens because they can't be controlled as easily as the Blues or the Vespids, and being larger, stronger, longer-lived than the Blues, and definitely more prone to violence, they must seem like a threat. They are, however, allowed to keep practicing the Imperial Mechanicus faith if they wish. And maybe there's even some who practice Chaos worship. Maybe there's Genestealers cults worshipping the Four-Armed Emperor in there. Generally speaking, their lives are infinitely better than they would have under the Imperium though. So for a look at how the Tau operate today, let's look at the novel Longshot by Rob Young. Spoilers, incidentally. So the manufacturing world of Atrusco sided with the Tau after a long period of neglect from the Imperium, and the Astra Militarum was sent in. This is usually the way of things. Some bureaucrat decides that the population of a world can survive on 1,000 calories a day and half heat rations. They start listening to Watercast propaganda on the radio. They make contact with the Watercast directly. They turn on the Imperial government with the help of some Tau military advisors. The Imperium can't bring itself to actually do anything to help its citizens, but when those citizens start to think for themselves, nothing, and I mean nothing, will stop them from sending wave after wave of barely trained, barely armed conscripts to liberate them. The fight on the world of Atrusco is essentially Stalingrad. The cold is killing more soldiers than both sides put together, and snipers are dueling in rusted out factories. It's like Enemy of the Gates. Good film. So the protagonist, Daria Nevik, is tasked with hunting down an expert Tau sniper codenamed Longshot. Cool name. During the operation, she's mortally wounded and left for dead by her squad mates, and the Tau pick her up. She's taken behind their lines to what is effectively a micro Tau colony on the world, and she's fully healed by their advanced technology. While behind Imperial lines, the troops are freezing and starving. Behind the Tau lines, Daria is fed and warm. She's taken to this beautiful garden where an ethereal talks to her about the greater good, and how in their society everyone has a place, no one's left out, and she can be part of it. One of the Imperial regiments on the planet is about to defect, and if she lends her sniping skills to the effort, she can also become part of the greater good. She almost goes along with it, but on the way out of the Tau Enclave, she sees what has become of the humans who started the rebellion. They've been herded into vast refugee camps, and since they're not able to work or fight, they're starving and freezing, arguably worse off than they were before. The greater good has no need of them, and although they're not being outright genocided, they just don't get to share in the utopia the Tau have built, because they built it for themselves. So there's meme after insufferable meme about the Tau being communists. It's not something any serious person with at least basic hygiene should really think about, but it is annoying. It's annoying because I think it's at least somewhat true. The Tao were supposed to be a caricature of specifically Chinese Maoist socialism and Asian collectivism more broadly. The racial elements of the Tao's portrayal, which aren't great, are a topic for another day. But basically, the Tao read like a satire of communism from and for somebody who's barely aware of what it is. A big part of that is the concept of the greater good itself. We genuinely don't know what it is. It's never been laid out. There's no precepts of the greater good in a codex or something. Now you're going to say that the greater good is utilitarianism, or the greatest good for the greatest number. Except the Lord doesn't ever say this outright. The greater good, as the Tao understand it, is the implementation of their caste system, and the idea that everyone can work harmoniously for the better of all. Sometimes the way you work for the better of all is that you gotta die in a refugee camp. So it's close to utilitarianism, but a very narrow interpretation of a philosophy that's a lot more complex than 6-word adage. Libertarians, for example, would say that unfettered selfishness produces the greatest good for the greatest number. Fascists, that it can be achieved by following the will of a single leader, and that only one ethnic group can be part of the greater good. Everyone can and does justify their beliefs as producing the greatest good, but Tao society is very specific. And what is that society? I'll level with you. Games Workshop are not political scientists. The societies they make aren't supposed to really function or really resemble societies that exist today. They just use symbols to suggest the faction's orientation, rather than actually sitting down and figure out how each would function. So is Imperium fascist? Sure, they have a lot of fascist symbolism, eagles and all that. But they've been ruled for much of their history by a group of people, the High Lords of Terror, and a big senate, no one single strongman. You could argue that the Imperium became fascist when Guilliman took control, but he barely has control. Worlds are so cut off from each other that they're more or less allowed to do what they like. The Inquisition and Astartes chapters can do what they like. The Mechanicus is an entirely separate state within a state that could succeed at any time. Guilliman is a dictator who can't dictate anything, ruling a totalitarian state composed of millions of functioning independent microstates, and government departments that can ignore him if they want. The Tau do have a single leader, Anvar, and he's dead. Not even semi-dead like the Emperor, but fully dead at the hands of a Calexis assassin, who, by the way, are usually only used to assassinate powerful psykers. The Tau keep up the charade that he's still alive though, use an AI hologram to represent him. It's unknown if this AI was a good enough copy for him to keep up his role as an Ethereal Supreme, or whether there's a new Shadow Ethereal Supreme. Being a wargame, the lives of individual civilian Tau on the planets is rarely touched upon. We know they're organised into communes, both on the battlefield and in everyday life, but these seem to be more administrative units than worker Soviets. The difference, and what makes them not communist in any way, is that it's the direction that power flows. In what the Soviet Union was attempting to become, individual factories and villages would send delegates to town councils. Town councils would send delegates to regional councils. Regional councils would send delegates to the Central Congress of Soviets. So what you said in your factory meeting would join a chorus of voices all flown upward to Moscow. That's what it means to have a dictatorship of the proletariat, by the way. In Tau society, this flow is reversed. Power is centralised in Onvar and flows down for the Ethereal Council, down to the different systems, or septs as they call them, and then to individual planets, and then to the communes on those planets. That's a dictatorship. You know the other place that operates on this model? The Imperium. It does it badly, but that would be their ideal. They even have a dead rule that he's in charge in name only. Now, even if you're one of the many, many people who can't have a serious conversation about communism, many such cases, then you could at least admit that the Imperium of Man isn't communist, right? Probably not, but I don't read the comments, so feel free to send me your illiterate drivel about why I'm gay and soy. You know who is communist? The Culture, from Iain M. Banks' book series of the same name. They're communist because Iain M. Banks is a communist who wrote them to be communist. Yeah, definitely awful, whatever. Humanity in the books was only allowed to join the Culture when they achieved full communism, and they were considered a danger when they retained capitalism. There's a lot of the Culture in the Tau, to the point where I strongly think that they're a direct inspiration. The Culture books were one of the biggest sci-fi franchises in the world for decades. Banks was one of the biggest sci-fi and literary writers. It would be really weird if they created a technologically advanced multi-species federation without thinking about the Culture. Unlike the Tau, the Culture is genuinely anarcho-communist. Fully luxury automated gay space communism, to be exact. No government, no scarcity, barely any rules. Literally, if you murder someone, they will assign a robot to hover around you, making sure you don't do it again. Banks wrote an essay, A Few Notes on the Culture, that I'll link to in the show notes. It goes into why the Culture is the way it is, how it came to be that way, and why it makes sense in his universe. The basics are this. Centralised authority of the kind that the Tau have and the Imperium are attempting makes no sense for a spacefaring civilization, living on ships, space stations, Dyson ring spheres. As Banks says, essentially the contention is our currently dominant power systems cannot long survive in space. Beyond a certain technological level, a degree of anarchy is arguably inevitable and anyway preferable. To survive in space, ships/habitats must be self-sufficient, very nearly so. The hold of the state, or the corporation, over them becomes tenuous if the desires of the inhabitants conflict significantly with the requirements of the controlling body. On a planet, enclaves can be surrounded, besieged, attacked. The superior forces of a state or corporation, hereafter referred to as hegemonies, will tend to prevail. In space, a breakaway movement would be far more difficult to control, especially if significant parts of it are based in ships or mobile habitats. The hostile nature of the vacuum and the technological complexity of life support mechanisms will make such systems vulnerable to outright attack, but that, of course, would risk the total destruction of the ship habitat, so denying its future economic contribution to whatever entity was attempting to control it. The Tau should, in theory, have reached a point where it's no longer possible to control their civilization, and they should have become like the Culture. But they haven't. Why is that? Mind control. The Ethereals are literally preventing the contradictions that cause the Culture to come into being from happening. How do we know that? When a Tau expeditionary force led by Commander Farsight had its Ethereals die, the expedition and its commander became rebellious and broke away from the Empire, establishing their own Farsight enclave in a single star system. The Tau know it as the Forbidden Zone, and all records of Farsight and his expedition have been erased. Also, Farsight has a demon sword and is 300 years old. Yes, there will be an episode about him. The second reason that the Culture can be communist while the Tau can't is AI and automation. The Culture's minds are able to plan a full economy, and full automation means that living beings in a Culture don't have to work unless they want to, much like Star Trek in that regard. I think that the Tau could do this, but their rulers are ideologically opposed to it. We know that the Tau don't have a taboo about abominable intelligence like the Imperium. They use it in drones, for example. They're able to download living beings' minds into engrams with such perfect clarity that they see no difference between the living Aunvar and its digital copy. And yet there is an entire caste of labourers and agricultural workers, and what scant references there are to their lives shows them working almost constantly, day in, day out. That shouldn't be necessary. So it must be a choice the Ethereals are making. They must be deliberately holding back their own technology to prevent the kind of society that the Culture and Federation have from coming into being. We don't know what the Ethereals want. Maybe they're just driven by hunger to expand. Maybe they have an agenda that will become apparent. Maybe they think what they're doing is the right thing. We do know that they could become communist space weebs anytime they want, but they're choosing a Culture as ruthlessly top down as the Imperium. So please, no more memes.